Namaste. Welcome back to Weird Pulse. In the previous recording, I called it Wired Pulse. I guess you should keep this as flexible in terms of the pronunciation because I'm trying to get a hang of what all to discuss and share with you people. Anyway, thank you. Many thanks for taking time out to listen. It's all about time and availability, will and skill. So today, 10th of January, 2025, the one topic that has grabbed the spotlight is 90-hour work week, thanks to a bite that came out from the chairman of L&T. He made some comments about the number of hours people should work over on Sunday, blah, blah, blah. And it has actually caught on like wildfire. And while I speak of this, really sorry to hear wildfires on the west coast of the US. I hope all friends and their property is safe. A lot of contacts in that part of the world, and prayers go out to the west coast. So this episode of Weird Pulse is around productivity, and a very favorite topic of mine because it's been 3 years since I've been releasing consulting programs to try and address the productivity issue. 3 years, especially because of the pandemic and the kind of impact it has had, a real black swan event, and the kind of impact it has had on output, global output, and a lot has been changed by the pandemic. It has brought out a work from home hybrid work style or work culture. It was unprecedented, and all those who lived through that and got out of it are somehow in 2025 going to be trying to leave behind all the negativity of those years. So it's 3 years since, this hybrid culture took over, and productivity and employee engagement has ever seen me suffering. Employees not wanting to get back to work, continue with work from home or keep it hybrid, and companies passing different kinds of rules, and fatwas is what I call it, fatwas, Phatwah, fatwas have been on how people should be getting back to work versus how Gallup measured this, and some of the polls conducted by Gallup did not give a very good picture about what people feel about getting back to work. Anyway, so it's about 3 years since I've been putting programs out, especially factoring the learnings from the previous years or my experience and what I felt is useful to enhance productivity whilst caring of employee well-being. I have done a few projects. I have seen some things work, some things didn't. That's usual. And today, when the L&T chairman, Mr. Subramanian, mentioned of his bite came out, or this recording came out over 90-hour work week, it is something that follows up with what one Mr. Narayan Murthy, the founder of Infosys, said once. He said, to build India into the next century, we need to work 70 hours a week. Even that was a revelation. There was a lot of noise and emotion associated as a reaction with Mr. Narayan Murthy's come, but now this went up to 90, and there's Mr. Musk who's pushing it to 100. Grant Cardone, he wants it to be 105, and many others. And most of these guys are operating in a 70 plus hour week. Now, this brings me the question about a practitioner like me, or a person who's consulting or who's seeing both sides of the thing as an employee versus a consultant, and caring about employee well-being, the emotion apart, trying to look at it objectively. I thought I'll tell you a little backstory from my experience. Two significant milestones. One is in 2000, when we started in GE Capital. 2000 to 2002, ending about 2.5 to almost 3 years. Productivity then was about people being on the phone because we were the first call center ever in India of sorts. Productivity was on the phone. And I remember what we used to have is if you're getting off the phone, not connected to get continuously answer calls, you needed something called a pre-approved time off. It was called payto. We couldn't get over that. That means somebody has to get off and take a break or something or anything. You need to get off. And the reason I mention this is about how many hours a person needs to spend on system working. There were many standards, and as the industry progressed, the first one was about how many hours a person needs to be on the phone for something like about 8 hours, uh, almost like 8 hours on the phone those days, or 9 hour shifts. Yeah. So that came up to something close to 5 day work, up to 40 hours of working. And there was a different culture in GE those days. So 40 hours didn't bother. We didn't care about 40 hours. There were guys competing to say how many hours people spent at work stretching. A stretch was a very sexy thing in GE. You get extra points on your appraisal or EMS. So that's one part of the world when we started. That's multinational, US to India, serving US customers. So that was one. The second I would mention is a Europe aspect. That is after December 99, 2000 to 2009, second quarter. That's when I joined Deutsche Bank. I was head of APAC for HR Ops Excellence, HRS Ops Excellence. So when I joined, it was around the time there was a major fraud in the company. A few hundred, a few million was swindled by some employee in payroll. And they were trying to address processes and try and get a satisfactory audit next time around and ensure customer satisfaction plus process efficiency. And I joined in to try and do whatever I can to enhance the processes and customer satisfaction as head of APAC. Now, during that point in time, that's around Q2, it was such that there was no standards of work about an HR contact center between Germany and India. So there was a lot of noise in the system. So they decided to fly over a couple of experts, including one of my peers who's head of Germany for Ops Excellence. And he came over from Germany to try and facilitate a harmonized process, process harmony session where two teams can get together and have a kind of a scrum or a session where we exchange best practices. Unfortunately, he fell ill with what he ate, so I had to do that session while I was new to the company, and I enjoyed that. So that was good fun to try and facilitate a kind of a Kaizen workshop. Yeah. Now, when I did that, some of the moot points that came up were there are no standards of work or measures between Germany and India. And one of the points of contention was productivity, because how many transactions or HR queries are people doing as a baseline in Germany that India, which can follow or emulate? So while this was happening, there were a lot of projects, and one of the projects I did was less than 10. It was called less than 10 because I took up a challenge and did a project, and that eventually won a CIS Core Banking Innovation Award. I did that in 12 weeks, that project. So when I did the project, there are a lot of findings about how things are non-standard and how much things depended on human will and all the other derail factors that inhibit productivity, etc. But at some point in time, I had to close and do some of these actions coming out of this workshop. And this had me traveling to Germany towards the third quarter to Berlin, wherein I had to go. And I heard from the director in Germany saying that we are not supposed to measure how many transactions a person does because it goes against the rules of German Workers' Council. Now, that was a shock to me because, in a much more comparative, in a much more developed country like in Germany compared to India, there was a rule that you don't measure number of transactions a person does, or number of calls a person takes, or number of measure of productivity, because the workers' council again is against that. Now, while I had to go and face the challenge of first, trying to speak to people who are more conversant in Germany versus English and other cultural aspects, I had to try and harmonize and get to a standard of how do we measure commonly between Germany and India productivity, number of hours, number of standard hours, number of transactions. So my idea was to try and measure the number of hours as standard that people can do and how many transactions people can do per hour rather than how many a person does. So it is not person dependent, which goes against the workers' council directives, but it is more so team dependent, which doesn't put anybody in negative light, but it gives a common measure between two centers, two contact centers. Now, this is 2000, one is 2000 in India, start of contact centers. The other is 2009, quarter two, quarter three, quarter four, almost. That is July to October 2009, when I ran this contact center project. What I understood was that in an outsourcing world, the client could say, I want this done. And as a service provider, something was happening. But what's important to note is labor laws were constant during all this time in India. Yeah. And I heard at some point in time in GE around 2005, they were measuring how many clicks with a mouse or how much of time a person spent on a keyboard. And they expected something like 60 to 70% or 80%, not 60 or 70, 85% utilization. Now, that was one of the targets, that a person is productive 85% of the time of the productive hours. Now, while I don't want to make it very, very confusing and all these the detail or in terms of how work gets measured, the whole talk around this number of hours debate, let me tell you, at some point in time in Deutsche Bank, when I proposed 140 hours a month, 140 hours a month as productive hours, there were people not willing to do it. Everything came politics, Germany's Workers' Council, we can't do this, we can't do that, our people need sick leave, we need to do this, and a whole lot of hogwash. It was not looking at the issue at hand with a little objectivity and some reasonable rationale. There was only emotional reaction or the fact that who's able to try and politically win that argument. It was not sensible. Nevertheless, there was something agreed. I don't know how it panned out later on because the way I see it is that 140 hours a month, compare that to a post-social media distraction age of now, post-pandemic, hybrid. Somebody says 90 hours a week, that is, a month is almost 300 hours plus. So I don't know whether it was working, was there unnecessary pushback then, or now it is being unreasonable, but the fact of the matter is that productivity is suffering today, no matter what. I can tell you as a consultant, the standards of output are dismal in some places, really dismal. So the way productivity is possible is efficiency, effectiveness, quality, customer satisfaction. All these are lovely words. It's going about achieving this with purpose is becoming all the more of a challenge than what I saw 15 years ago. And now, if people are saying you need to work 70 hours, 90 hours, I think the number of distractions in today's world are much, much higher. There weren't so many distractions. There were no smartphones in 2000, I would say 8 or 9, as much as they are today. There was an iPhone then, but it wasn't as, it was not like now. 2011 to 14, during then, maybe they were BlackBerry messengers and they were also smartphones, but not as much. But now, social media is a massive distraction. There is a smartphone invasion that has happened in our lives is massive. And there, what I call them as productivity leakages. Productivity leakage is the biggest challenge. And if I have to try and take a side on L&T chairman versus Mr. Narayan Murthy, why they're saying 70 to 90 hours, probably they're adding up all the leakage and the distractions and saying you need to spend so much of time. Or they're saying, I don't know what they're expecting is the thorough utilization of an employee. Again, the pay scales and all those are debatable, what they get paid and things like that. In some companies, I see people are just unnecessarily pampered and the production is really poor. So maybe they can absorb that kind of hate. That's their will, that's their wish. But overall, I see that the standards of productivity and what can be expected cannot be only talked about in terms of the number of hours, but it should be in terms of the efficiency. If somebody puts in 2 hours of work, but the value of that work probably can be much, much higher than what somebody puts in uh, for 10 hours. For example, white collar jobs versus blue collar jobs. And if somebody influential says something, I don't think people differentiate that between labor or a white collar job and the kind of job that is. It just, there's so much of an emotional reaction or very little processing of what is being said as context. But all said and done, I think this is a wonderful debate at the start of the year. It's 2 years past the pandemic. Things are stabilizing, things changing with geopolitics. It looks like Mr. Trump's coming into office and some wars might stop and things can settle down a bit. And new departments of efficiency are taking over in the US. That's a wonderful case studies on bureaucracy and cutting waste. Productivity is so much about eliminating waste and trying to enhance efficiencies and effectiveness. That's something to look forward to what Vivek and Mr. Musk might do as DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency. Something I'm following closely, especially as governments and bureaucracies and things like that, in terms of what kind of production that's possible and the kind of standards they're going to probably set. So it's a lot to look forward to in terms of 2025 and productivity, but this is a space to watch. But the last thing I want to say is that the program I have developed, that's Prahelika, which I've been talking about, addresses two most critical points. That is, factoring all the learnings from the past 25 years, that is productivity and well-being. Well-being, the Gallup definition is career, financial, physical, social, and community aspects of a human measured as are you struggling, are you suffering, or you're thriving. Yeah, so that's a specific way of looking at it. There's a measure and there's output. So productivity, while factoring employee well-being, is going to be a win-win. So I'm putting this out there to say, how are people? You want to try and enhance your productivity, employee engagement, and while ensuring employee well-being. Give me a shout or write back on LinkedIn for wherever you're listening, or you can get in touch with me on X. I'm on X. And we should talk. I think I have a solution about getting higher levels of employee utilization and employee engagement as the right balance. And I think I got something working. It's tried and tested. We should talk and see how we can do good, really. I mean, get the productivity up, higher production, high stakeholder value, higher customer satisfaction is good for everybody. It's good for business. Maybe we'll talk about it later, but this is my take on productivity and well-being. And I hope this debate continues. And I'm looking forward to trying and setting some new standards in the space. I think there is a lot of pain areas around productivity, not only measurement, but also the execution. So both. So anyway, thank you for listening. We will talk more soon. Jai Hind.